First, there is the one, the undifferentiated ecology, the whole. And it's represented by the sphere. The one, the possibility field, reaches out in all directions equally. We, wherever we are at the center. Not because we are more important or less important than anything else. It's just when you are at the center of a sphere, it moves as far in this direction as in this direction. And eventually, if you move too far in one direction, it takes you back to the other side. The sphere naturally balances ourselves. And we are always at the center of the possibility field. It can be infinitely hotter than it is now. It can be infinitely colder than it is now. Life can get infinitely harder than it is now. Life can get infinitely easier than it is now. The possibility field exists on an infinite number of infinite continuums, and we are always at the center. However bad life is, it can get infinitely worse. However good life is, it can get infinitely better. We're always at the crossroads. We're always at the center. Now, within the reality of all that is, there's a very tiny microcosm, a subset of all that is, called what is possible, what is conceivable for a human brain, for a human consciousness. And admittedly, that includes our entire physical universe as we begin to explore the folds of space-time and the ability to exit space-time and enter space-time outside of the mathematics, right? It's a little bit like you can get to the number 7 by 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 5, right, equals 7, right? You can get to a place mathematically through space and time. Or you can get to 7 by exiting space-time and then entering space-time in a different set, in a different location. We are a very, very small part of all that is. The universe, right? What we call the universe. The exploration of the possibility fields within space-time. What we call the universe is a very small part of all that is. And our actual reality is a very small part of our probability field. One could say that our probability field is 1,000 times bigger than our actuality, right? That I could be moving my hand here. That's probable. But my hand is here. That's actual, right? But I could be moving it over here or here. I could pause for that long or that long. And there are an infinite number of decimal points between those two pauses, an infinite number of divisions that time can be cut up into, that space can be cut up into. And they're all part of the probability field. The probability field is vast relative to the actuality within the probability. And the possibility field is as vast relative to actuality and probability, right? The possibility field is vast relative to the probability field. But all of that exists within mathematics, within space and time. And what this means is that within the circle, we create mathematics, we create words. We descend into the knowledge of good and evil with division, with language. And the language is a language of distinction. And all a distinction means is difference. A distinction is a demarcation of difference. My skin is different than your skin. This blue is darker than this blue. And the distinction can be infinite, meaning there is an infinite number of shades of blue as we move along this gradient. We could divide this half of the gradient into 1,000,000 colors, 1,000,000,000 colors, 1,000,000,000,000 colors, right? If we have the ability to measure at that point within the decimal system, then the color can be demarcated as part of that infinite continuum. But it starts with duality, dua, two from one, right? So we start with the unbroken whole, and we cut it in half. We cut it in two. We cut it in two with words, right? Those can be mathematical words, or those can be verbal, linguistic words, right? We can divide, and the one becomes two. That's mathematical language, right? First we had the circle. Now we have two halves. It begins with language. Now, as soon as duality, the knowledge of good and evil, the knowledge of distinction, as soon as we cut the one into two, we now have a system of consciousness, meaning we can now distinguish one thing from another because we've cut it into pieces. We've cut it in half. Black, white, up, down, male, female, dog, horse, right? Animals, human. These are just all the many ways that we cut the one into two. Now, having cut the one into two, we now generate a possibility field and a probability field, and an actual field that is bigger than the two, because there are 268 trillion shades of white. Now, we haven't mapped those out on a computer because our chips aren't big enough. We've just mapped out 240 million colors because our chips can hold the numbers of zeros and ones to map out 246 million colors, right? And because that's enough, the eye can't tell the difference between the 246th millionth shade of white and the 247th million shade of white. It's just white is good enough, right? But as soon as we have two, we have an infinite gradient between the two. We have many. And every single line of the many is a cut of the one into pieces. And this is the descent into loneliness, the descent into separation, the descent into language, and the descent into human consciousness. When the undifferentiated ecological whole is viewed through a grid of numbers and words, two languages, the language of mathematics, the language of words, we now look back at ourselves, the undifferentiated whole, with which we remain innately and inextricably connected on every conceivable dimension. We look back at ourselves and we feel separate. We feel distinct. Our language has separated our consciousness from the ecological body out of which we emerge, to which we will ultimately return, and to which we are inextricably connected. Now, we all have important decisions to make. Actually, birth makes them for us. We descend into a cult that has an identity, a cultural identity, a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that defines the difference between this cult, this culture, and this cult, this culture. And the difference is defined by the difference in the patterns, the different frequencies of the identity pattern. This cult thinks these thoughts, feels these things, eats these things, says these things, dresses this way, and is like this. And this cult thinks this, feels this, and you can see the cult patterns permeating the cult members. Right? Every cult, in order to stay alive, must have members. Right? And of course, some cults, some cultures take better care of their members. Right? In some cults, the basic human needs of all of its members, or 90% of them, or 98 or 99%, are met. The cult, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, leads to a fulfillment of its constituents' needs, its members. And in other cults and other cultures, the majority of the members of that cult are deeply unfulfilled, and the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being within that cult is unfulfilling. Meaning, if everyone in the cult thinks this, does this, says this, and feels this, it will produce an outcome in which the majority of the members of that cult will be deeply unfulfilled. Right? For example, one could have a culture where the ritual of farming consists of throwing a seed in the air, taking a rifle and shooting it, and getting really good at splitting the seed and shattering it. But the agriculture of that cult consists of the few seeds that the farmer misses on its way down, right? And this would be a cult of starvation, right? You go to farming school, you get a rifle, you learn to throw your seeds in the air, you start shooting at them, right? And if you're a good farmer within that cult, you get an automatic, right? Machine gun where you can shoot more seeds per second so that fewer of those seeds will germinate. And then you get an award based on how many seeds you shot, not on what you grew, right? It would be a cult of starvation. Another cult might teach every one of its members to grow a rich, biodiverse ecology of vegetables and herbs, and how to cook. And by kindergarten, every one of its cult members would have a little 100-square-foot raised bed garden that produced more food than the individual could consume in a year, right? And this cult, by kindergarten, would be self-sufficient, or, by age 7, right? So every member of the cult would know how to grow organic vegetables and have done it. And it would be considered, how good is your vegetable garden, right? And that would be the greeting. How good is your vegetable garden today? 300 pounds, 200 pounds, right? That would be the response, not, hello, how are you? I am fine. Hello, how are you? I am fine, as our cult. But how many vegetables did you harvest today? And the answer would be 27 pounds, 28 pounds. And the person who harvested the most vegetables, and that would be the standard greeting, right? That's what cults do. They standardize things, right? So, hello, how many? And you wouldn't even go out if you hadn't bothered to harvest your vegetables. Well, this would be a cult swimming in fresh produce. And it would also be a cult with efficient scales, because that's the question. You're measuring something, and so you would want to get very efficient at thing, and then it might also be a cult that tended towards heavier vegetables, right? How heavy was your crop today, not how diverse, right? So, different cults reward different qualities, different habits. And those habits produce dramatically different results. right? The cult of America is generally very good for business, relatively speaking, right? The cult of Thailand is generally very good for smiling and relaxed well-being. It's not an accident, right? Every cult has its protocols, and every protocol produces scarcity and abundance in different areas to different degrees. So you just measure what your cult produces, and then you measure what your cult needs, what its members needs. Now, all humans need the same thing. They need to survive, they need to be secure, they need love and belonging, they need self-esteem, they need to discover what they're excellent at and develop those gifts. They need to bring value and abundance into the world by harnessing those gifts to deliver value to themselves and other people. And they need to become part of something greater than themselves, to identify with something bigger than themselves, to transcend the limits of the identity, to be a part of something bigger. Every human being in the history of humanity needs that, will need that, has needed that. And some cults do better than others. Denmark does a better job at meeting the human needs of its members than the United States. Right? Depends. Thailand does a better job at love and belonging in stratas, in areas, than the United States does, right? Bhutan does a better job of being carbon neutral, being carbon negative, right? So every cult, every country has its protocols and its outputs. And intelligence is measured by the efficiency with which energy, time, money, and natural resources is transformed into sustainable well-being for its, for people. Now we descend from the one into language, and as we descend, we descend into a system, because language is a system of thinking. It is a system of perceiving. So, for example, and reality is far too big, far too complex to capture in a tiny snippet of time like this. So we'll illustrate a tiny window into this fractal pattern, into this hologram of consciousness and language. How do you want to divide the human being? See, because if someone says, "What are you?" and you just say, "I am," that's the one. That's the undifferentiated whole. So, but what they mean is, how do you cut yourself up, right? Are you a man or are you a woman? Now, depending on how you look at that, well, I'm a man, right? But is a man separate from a woman? Well, you could say, a man has a penis, a woman has a vagina, separate, different. But then you say, well, where does a man come from? Well, it comes from a woman, right? A man comes out from a woman's body. And then you say, well, where does a woman come from? Well, she comes from the semen injected into the womb. So, are you separate or are you one? If you cannot have one without the other, if you cannot have a man without a woman and a woman without a man, are you separate? You could say, are you a person or are you a plant? Seems pretty simple. I'm a person. I'm not a plant. Well, can you have a person without a plant? Oh, well, I can just eat animals. The Atkins diet, 100% animals, right? I'll just do that. I've got no connection with plants. I just eat animals. I am a person. I'm not a plant. I don't need plants. And then you think, well, what do animals need to survive, right? Well, I only eat tigers, right? I only eat tigers, and tigers don't need plants. Well, what do tigers eat? Well, they eat gazelles, right? What do gazelles eat? They eat plants, right? So if there was no plants, and there was no gazelles, and there was no tigers, then there's no me. In other words, there's an inextricable connection between me and a plant. I say I'm not a plant, but that's a lie, because without plants, there can be no me. In other words, we are part of an interconnected ecology. Without plants, there can be no oxygen, again, no me. So it kind of seems like I am a plant. If without plants there is no me, it kind of seems like plants must be a part of me because they are. This part is connected with this part. One part cannot exist without the other. A human being cannot exist without a plant. And some plants can't exist without human beings. A man cannot exist without a woman. A woman cannot exist without a man. You could say, are you a planet or are you a person? Well, I'm a person. I'm not a planet. You think, well, where did you come from? Well, I came from a planet. So how can you not be what you came from? Because to say I'm not that means there's no relationship. I'm not connected. There's no relationship. Never met them, right? Well, wait a minute. You were born out of them. The planet is your womb. Right? Pretty close relationship. Your womb for billions of years as you evolved, right? The earth has been the womb of energy, iterating, evolving, mutating into what is here today, right? Right. So the truth is we are connected to all things. That's the truth. But the lie that allows us to be conscious is based on division. And so when we say, well, who are you? Are you a man? Do you have a mind? A mind. Well, do you have a mind? Is your mind separate from all the other minds? Or are you part of one mind? Where did you learn your language, in this case, English? Did you invent it in isolation? You just were raised by wolves and just came up with the English language independent of everyone else? Now, if your mind is shaped by a language that was given to you, then it is not a mind, it is the mind. A mind that you share with your fellow cult members, which you share with the underlying ecology that has given birth to more than 10,000 cults and counting. Now, one way to cut up the one, the supposed one, because the individual is a fractal representation of the larger one, and then within the individual level, we'd like to cut ourselves up into bits as well, with words. So we say, let's divide it into 3, right? Let's take the 1 and divide it by 3, and it looks like this. I have a heart, I have a mind, I have a body, right? Heart, mind, and body, right? If you divide the 1, a human being, into 3, that seems about right. Heart, mind, and body. I think things, I feel things, I sense things. Right? Heart, mind, and body. And so there we have it. And then we look at this, having cut it into 3 bits as if they're separate. They're not. You cannot have a heart without a body. You cannot have human thought without a human body. You cannot have a human body without a thought, without a mind. You cannot have a human body without a heart. Right? So heart, mind, and body, not so separate, right? Then you look at, well, how do I feel things? Like I say, I have a heart and I feel things, like I feel angry. How do you feel angry? Do you need any chemicals to happen in the brain and in your biology to feel angry? Well, you do. So my feelings are created by my body and change my body. So obviously they're connected. They're an interconnected ecology. And then, can you create thoughts without feelings? Like, if you have 0 feeling, what draws you to even wake up or get out of bed or think something? Right? Emote, to energize the body, the mind with motion, with energy, right? There's no battery. Why do you still think? Where does that come from? So you realize that while words do a great job of cutting things into pieces, the pieces are so inextricably connected, in fact, that the words become meaningless. If every thought changes the chemistry of my body, if every feeling changes the chemistry of my body, if the chemistry of my body needs to change in order for me to think a thought or feel a feeling, then why not just say there's an interconnected ecology that includes thoughts, feelings, and sensations that are inextricably connected from one another. They're really all one. A thought is a sensation is a thought, as long as you apply language to it, right? You need language to create human consciousness. You need language to create a thought. So, the trouble with any system, in this case, I am heart, mind, and body, a division of 3. We take the 1, I, we divide it into 3, and we say heart, mind, and body, is what about all this bit over here? You see, it doesn't fit into a triangular division. It's just unconscious, right? We don't have a paradigm for all that stuff. What happens to all this stuff in here? It's kind of vague, right? Here's my mind, here's my heart, here's my body. There's a lot of waste, illusionary waste, meaning there's stuff going on ecologically inside and out in all of these spaces. We just don't have language for it. It doesn't fit into the paradigm. And when we draw hard lines through the ecology of time, of space, of reality, we meet resistance, because the reality, and this is a good kind of chance to look at the planet, the reality is that a river flowing from Utah to California doesn't stop at the state line. A tornado moving from Utah to California doesn't stop at the state line. What happens on this side of the line affects what's on this side of the line. In other words, the line is a joke. The line is a lie. The lie is the line, right? When we divide something into language that is in fact interconnected, reality is constantly trying to blur the lines of our paradigms, of our words. But the ego that defines itself self-referentially as a pattern of thoughts and words that come out of those thoughts and thoughts that come out of those words, I am this, I am not this, I am this. The ego is constantly trying to defend the lines that give it the illusion of existence. I identify with what? The pattern, right? I am a heart, mind, and body. That's me. But it's not you, right? You've already seen the body moves and blurs with the mind, which blurs with the heart. But you also, what isn't as clear, is you can just as easily say, I am an angry heart, a sad heart, a kind heart. I am a sharp mind, a dull mind. You know, as you move around the circle, it's not just 3. You can divide the 1 into 10, into 20, into 1,000. It's just too hard for the ego, the I, to attach itself to a very complex pattern, right? So if I attach myself to I am a heart with a mind and a body, or I am a body with a heart and a mind, I can identify with that, right? I can hang on to that pattern, right? It's a pattern, heart, mind, and body. That's what I am. I am heart, mind, and body. I can hang on to that. But if I say I am a mind that, and then fill in the blank for the next 10 years, and then I am a heart that fill in the blank for the next 10 years, and then I am a body, fill in the blank for the next 10 years. Because if we have all the time in the universe, we cannot speak fast enough, we cannot think fast enough to keep up with the electronic or the subatomic particles in a single finger. If I give you the job of articulating in language the individual movements of the individual subatomic particles of one finger and give you an unlimited lifespan, in 1 trillion years, you will be further behind than now, right? Because while you're talking at a very slow speed, more than 1 trillion subatomic particles will be moving at a very high speed, which means that every moment you try to capture reality in language, the reality of a simple finger, you will get further behind, right? So the ego can't identify with that. What's it got to hold on to? This subatomic particle was moving like that, and then it moved like that, and then, and meanwhile, this other one was doing this, and that one was doing that. It's hopeless. right? So the ego doesn't like the complexity of reality. It likes the simplicity of dogma, the simplicity of simple modes of thought. There are good guys and bad guys. Now, I'm a good guy, and we've got to kill the bad guys, right? I'm a good guy, I want to kill the bad guys, right? It's a wonderful identity, right? Dun, 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 dun. It's very nice, very simple, black and white. Wonderful, right? Now, simple identities are easy to hang on to and hard to live by, right? Right? If you go around deciding that half the world is good and half the world is bad, and then doing battle with half of reality, you'll always be at war. It's very difficult, but it's very simple, right? It's so peaceful, right? You know, the longer you do that, the more pain you experience, the more pain you cause, the more you start to see things with more complexity. You know, someone from that family killed your grandmother. Now, if you think grandmothers are important, well, then when you kill that person there, the grandmother in that family is now grieving the loss of a son. So are grandmothers important, or only my grandmother is the only important grandmother on the planet? So it's perfectly fine to make thousands of grandmothers suffer to have revenge for my grandmother. Well, that may sound good to a teenager, right? Revenge at all costs, but it wears on you. After a few years, a few deaths, a little bit of thought, it doesn't hold up. So you start to develop more complex models of identity. Now, there's a very important set of equations here and continuums. Now, one of them is the continuum of attachment. Now, the I is that which identifies, attaches to a pattern, to an idea, to a word, to a thought, a belief, a dogma. The I is what identifies. I am a Republican. I am a Republican. Right? I'm a Republican. It's the I, the ego, is just another word for I, that attaches. I am this. I am this thought, right? The ego is attached to the identity, to the pattern of words that we've already established aren't real. You know, first of all, it's a map of reality. Language is not reality. If I say I am a Republican, and then I translate that into a different language, then I say I am a Sublican, right? There's one language that the meaning is communicated with the sound Republican, and in another language it's communicated Sublican. So it's obviously not the sound. It's the idea, but then it's obviously not the idea. The idea is a jumble of words that doesn't capture the reality, but it also isn't reality. No. But by Sublican, what I mean is I am someone who votes for smaller government. So I vote for people who vote for smaller government, and I put them in government, making the government bigger, right? Because I'm voting for someone to go into government, and as they arrive, government will get bigger, right? I'm not voting for nothing, but I'm voting for someone who says they will vote for a smaller government, and I'm voting them into office, into government. So, you know, that's, but my vote, the check mark isn't them. And the idea of a sublocan isn't them, right? The subatomic particles moving in that, that's not sublocan, right? Sublocan isn't subatomic particles. It's a symbol for various ideas. And the ideas are all framed in language. And the language is ultimately an illusion because it's not real, right? For example, if you vote to benefit the public and you have no money because you earned no money, then you could be as libertarian as you wish. You could be as progressive as you wish. Money for all disabled people, money for all homeless people, money. But where is the money coming from? Well, it's just all the money we have, yes, but you have nothing. You see, so the Democrat is connected to the Republican. The do-gooder is connected with the rich person, right? I just give money away that I get from this person who has money because I can't run a business and make money giving it away. I'm busy giving it away, right? Don't you understand? I give money away. Right? But if that's your pattern, that's all you do is give money away, then you don't have any of your own, right? So who do you depend on? Who do you rely on? Someone who makes money and takes money so that you can give it away. Otherwise, there isn't any to give. So I'm not like those people who take money. I just take money from people who have money and I give it away, right? So are those really separate people, right? I just exhale. Do I have someone injecting air in my spine? Or do I inhale so that I can exhale, right? You cannot separate reality from reality. You can only carve up the world in different languages from different points of view. It's all got to balance out. Every piece of the puzzle has got to fit back into reality, or reality is not complete and will not function, right? Reality is an interconnected ecology. Words are a delusion of a puzzle that doesn't exist outside of language. It is created by the knowledge of good and evil, by the descent into distinction, but the distinctions do not exist except in the mind of those using the language. And the distinctions are different based on the language, the cult language and memes, and the words that are used. There is an infinite continuum of attachment, where the I identifies and says, I am this thought, versus let go and say, some part of me has that thought, to that thought is, right? So an ego that lets go and just says, thoughts flow through my mind. I am not my thoughts. There's that thought, there's that thought, there's that thought, and maybe tomorrow I'll be another thought, right? You've got a tremendous fluidity of identity, right? And that can come from two places. One is, well, it can actually come from an infinite number. Let's not kid ourselves. That's just an easy cop-out. It's one or the other is very simple. The ego loves it, right? Because then not much to think about. The spaciousness to be fluid with identity can come from trillions upon trillions of different places, right? And then we'll just reduce down to a couple that we have the time and energy to think about. One of them is out of fear. I'm Jewish, I'm in Germany, I'm afraid, so I've got to be a German. Now I've got to be a philosopher German. I've got to be this. I've got to be whatever helps me to survive. So out of fear and desperation in a sociopathic environment, I'm a chameleon. I'm moving my identity. So that's fear-based fluidity. Another form is traumatic dissociation or schizophrenia, right? I don't want to be present in any place. I just want to move endlessly and get lost in all the different faces of my probability field. I just don't want to witness any one moment, and I don't want to talk to myself. I don't want to meet myself. So there's no container. There's just waves of probabilities. Another is curiosity. I wonder what it's like to think this. I wonder what it's like to feel that. Well, today I'm a this. I think tomorrow I'll be a Catholic. I'll do that for a week or two, and then I'll put this other clothes on, this other identity on. I'll be a Hasidic Jew. What do Hasidic Jews do? Don't they? Well, they have to speak these words. They have to learn Hebrew. I was learning Hebrew, and now I'm a Muslim. Well, what do? Well, they have to pray 5 times a day. They have to do this. Oh, that's my pattern, right? I'll do this. Sorry, I can't, I'm going to do this and this. And so this curiosity, I just wanted to be what it's like here. I wanted to go live in a forest for a week and see what happened. So interesting. My mind did not like that forest. Then I wanted to binge watch Netflix for 27 hours. You have no idea what emerged out of me. This and that, right? So the identity is the pattern. The I is what holds to the pattern. Identity. Identity, right? It's got to have a pattern or I can't recognize myself. I'm lost. So attachment and dissociation, for a whole host of reasons, is one of the key continuums of identity. Now, what's interesting is that trauma leads to insecurity of the ego, because the ego is the only part of us that is traumatized. Because the ego, I, attaches to the identity, to the pattern. And so we say, I'm an independent person. I have confidence. I am this. Says the ego, right? That's who I am. I think this, I do this, I do this. And then the ego encounters a large, unregulated or hostile energy. And its confidence fails. Its self-awareness, its sense this is who I am, collapses. It's beaten up. It's terrified of death. It's lonely. It's humiliated. So now it's not the old pattern. The I has lost its identity, its pattern, and finds itself in the unknown, in pain, loneliness, searching for a new pattern and feeling helpless. That's called trauma. It's called a traumatized ego. It's the identity that is traumatized, right? I no longer look the same. I'm all beaten up. I'm this and that. I no longer talk the same. My ear was ripped off, etc. And my pattern is shattered. More importantly, so is my confidence. I thought that I was this and I could remain this, but I learned that just 5 random people destroyed my pattern. Now I think completely differently. I feel differently. I taste differently. I'm interested in different things. My whole identity has been shattered. Well, an ego that has experienced that repeatedly, particularly in childhood, has a terror of violation, of being shattered, of that pattern being shattered. And so they cling to identity, to a pattern. of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, that they feel is robust, and they may hang out with large groups. We are the this. So the more traumatized an individual is in childhood, the more likely they are to attach to a cult group that has a strong identity, a strong pattern that they say, I know what that is, that's the way it is, and that's the way it is, right? And so the trouble, so the higher the trauma, the higher the attachment. The higher the trauma, the more we attach to something dogmatic and simplistic that seems secure. The higher the trauma, the more we look to the tradition and the less we look to the new. So, for example, severe trauma tends to create religious interests because they've been around, traditional religion and stuff, because it's been around for thousands of years. Trauma, nearly dying, nearly getting bankrupt will lead someone to like, I want to be a banker, some long job that has a history. It's not, I nearly came bankrupt 3 times, I was humiliated 3 times, and then I just thought, maybe I'll be an artist and see what happens, right? No, it tends to be people who have a very solid traditional history with lower trauma that are more interested in, well, let's just see what happens if we do this, right? And explore. So high trauma equals high fear of the unknown equals high clinging to the identity, to the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. Now, all simple, tightly held ideas are dogmatic because there's lots of reality that kind of stands in the way, right? God creates all things as part of his plan, right? It's only a man. I don't want to think, I want something simple, right? And it also tends to create, stultification in development, so we remain somewhat childlike, so then we need a parental figure, a God, a church, something, right? So it creates power structures, and it creates manipulability, right? Because when we're desperate to hang on to identity, and someone shapes that identity, a chief, a pastor, a president, a dictator, well, then we need to follow, we need to hold on. And then they can say, well, good Christians would do this, and you have to do it because it's too frightening to go into the unknown. Right? So we become trapped in an identity, a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And the more attached we are, the more trapped we are, the more trapped we are, the more we have to go in a loop. We have to go here, and then we have to go here. And then there's only one place to go, which is here. Then we have to go here. There's nowhere else to go. Now, in fact, there is infinite places to go, because this isn't real. None of this is real. There is no mind separate from a heart. There is no body separate from a mind. There's no one person separate from other people. There's no women separate from men. There's no people separate from the universe. It's all a lie. But the dogma, the division, is around and round and round and round and round and round and round and round. Now, this insanity will be troubled by truth. It's not that simple. It's not that simple. It's not working. If you get deep into any system of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, you will find a fatal flaw within the system. It was the people at the Vatican who best understood the problem of 5% of Catholic priests raping boys. They understood it the most because they were getting all the reports and had a special division set up to move pedophiles from one parish to another, right? Now, maybe an individual priest who has shortcomings and failings still believes in the Catholic Church and its system because they don't have the information. But by the time you're the Pope, your faith in a system that is killing a percentage of your followers in the name of God, through suicide, through shame, through addiction. You know, when you sexually abuse children, particularly men in a cult that tells those men they go to hell for having sex with other men, right? So first your cult, that's a thought. God is a man who doesn't like other men. So he will burn you alive if you like other men. But you're supposed to love God, just not in that way. And, well, that's what it is, right? Every cult has its dogmas, its tenets, its boundaries. And then you say, listen to the priest who tells you you will go to hell for giving sexual pleasure to another man, and then after the sermon, invites you into the back room and says, suck on my penis. It's the will of the Lord. Schizophrenia, insanity. Don't tell anyone or you'll go to hell. Right? What does someone do with that confusion, with that cruelty, with that stupidity, with that pain? Well, some drink themselves to death. Some commit suicide more directly. Some beat up homosexuals because they're so ashamed of their own homosexuality. Kill them. Refuse to give them a job, whatever. Right? So what do you do when you're at the top of your system and you realize it doesn't work? Like I'm at the top of my system and it doesn't work. Right? I'm not terribly intelligent, meaning I take vast amounts of time, money, and natural resources and make myself miserable a lot of the time. I'm very dumb. But I know that. Other people think I'm smart and successful and wonderful and remarkable, right? But they're not at the top of the system. They're in the top of their system, and I think they're wonderful and smart and all of that, right? The Catholic Church knows how corrupt it is. The President of the United States knows how fucked up his government is. It's a him, which is the first part of the fuck up, right? That's an automatic in a chauvinistic cult, right? The parent understands just how bad it is. My kids are looking up to me. I don't know anything. Heaven help them. They look at me, Dad, what should I do here? You see, Dad knows what a dunce he is, unless he's too dumb to know that, right? Because the really incompetent idiots are too dumb to know that they're dumb. So they think they know everything when they know absolutely nothing. They don't even know that they know nothing, right? It's that bad, right? But people with half a brain look at this and say, oh, you poor kid being born into, you're looking to me to live a good life. I'm just trying to not shoot someone today. That's my definition of success. I got through today without shooting anyone. Oh, it's close. On the freeway, Oh, it's close, right? And, so you have to climb the power structure of any dogma, of any system, and then you realize that, the people at the top are more aware than the people at the bottom that the system doesn't work. But they're hiding that truth in order to feed on the children that want to pretend that there's a wonderful power figure out there, that if they just do what they're told, they will be rewarded. Because they don't want to think for themselves, right? People are furious. Children are furious when you point out the incompetency of the power structure. No, mom and dad do know what they're doing. They're right. They're good people, and you're not grateful, right? Wonderful parents. Our government is doing everything it can for us. It's a good president, right? Don't listen to any of those lies about his character, about his sexual conduct. Don't listen to that. It's not true. And if it is, the other side is worse. So it doesn't matter, right? Children are furious if you point out that the deity is not all it's cracked up to be. Because the only obvious response is to grow up. And they're well aware that they're not perfect, right? Which means accepting the messiness of life, and that's terrifying to a traumatized ego. I want to find one place where I'm safe, where I'm perfect, where things, and just do this system, and if I do, I'm going to go to heaven. It's all going to be great, and all the horrible things that I've had to endure, it'll all be washed away. I just have to do what I'm told in this book, right? Which is why it's so upsetting, for a child to be told you'll go to hell if you suck this man's penis. Come into my vestry and suck my penis. It was. Everyone said do this, and I've been given an equation that demands that I grow up that I'm not ready to. My parents were children, my grandparents were children, and I don't want to have to grow up either, right? Grown-up bodies, sure, but think for myself, iterate, synthesize, not so much. The simpler the system, the cruder it is, the more violent it is, the dumber it is. But the easier it is for the ego to identify with it. The more traumatized the ego, the more it looks for something solid, hard, permanent, traditional to hold on to as a way of combating the absolute terror of facing the unknown alone.